Hi, I'm Grant Bartley. The moral argument for the existence of God goes as follows. 1. Without God there can be no objective moral values. 2. But there are objective moral values. 3. Therefore there is a God. This argument is a form of the syllogism called modus tollens. This is a logically valid argument, meaning that if the premises 1 and 2 are true, then the conclusion 3 cannot be false. It is, however, disputable whether the premises of the argument are true. I think they are, and that therefore this is a good argument, as well as a logically valid one. Let's start by considering the first premise: without God there can be no grounds for objective moral values. I should note that the moral argument is not the argument that people can't be moral without a belief in God. Certainly someone can have great compassion and empathy without believing in God, and this and other types of feelings and impulses can and do compel a great deal of good and kind behaviour. Neither does believing in God necessarily make you a good person. The whole history of religion shows us that. The argument is instead that without God there are no grounds for the objective reality of moral truths. That is, without God there are no grounds for saying that certain behaviours are really right or wrong. Do you think evolution provides grounds for morality? The universal nature of moral principles is incompatible with the partisan nature of natural selection principles, so there's no way that the latter can ground the former. The basic principle of natural selection is survival of the fittest, right? By contrast, morality commands benefiting others based not on their genetic closeness to you, but on their intrinsic dignity as self-aware beings. There's no way you can make these two imperatives compatible. If you think that morality can be reducible to the principle of the survival of the fittest, this shows that you don't know what morality is, or maybe that you don't know what evolution implies. The best evolutionary principles can do is to command promotion of the tribe over the individual. But that's not morality, and that's just the start of its problems. But can God be the grounds of objective goodness? Let's look at a prominent objection to that idea called Euthyphro's dilemma. In Plato's Euthyphro dialogue, Plato has Socrates question Euthyphro about God as the ground of values. Now Euthyphro was to become a priest of Zeus rather than Yahweh, and Socrates questions him about piety, not morality. But we can transpose the argument there to talk about a monotheistic God as the grounds of morality. In those terms, the horns of Euthyphro's dilemma can be stated as: is what is good good independent of God? Or is what is good good because God declares it to be good? The argument claims that if what is good independent of God, then God is unnecessary to establish goodness. Alternatively, what is good cannot be good just because God declares it to be so, as this would seemingly allow anything thus declared to be good. Yet we intrinsically know that even if God were to say that murder and torture were good, this would not therefore make murder and torture good. Therefore, the argument claims God is unnecessary to establish objective moral values. This argument attacks a way of thinking about the relationship between morality and God that Christian theologians, at least, do not typically hold. So it's what's called a straw man argument. Whether you're a theist or not, we need to define what is good and bad independently of our concept of God. The definition of morality I use is that it is good to do good and bad to do bad. It is morally good to promote intrinsic goods and so on. But the Euthyphro argument errs in that an objective definition of good and bad is not itself an objective basis for morality. By contrast, God provides a standard or exemplar of goodness, and so objectifies moral goodness. Unfortunately, this is an oversimplification, as it implies that goodness is something higher or better than God which God happens to partake in. And so Euthyphro's point still holds. It is more accurate to say that God himself is the grounds of goodness. This means something like, the very meaning of goodness is part of what God is. Or if you prefer, that moral truth exists in its very being, in the being of God. So God is a sort of personal platonic good in this sense, if you like. The second premise of the moral argument is that some assertions about the morality of acts really are true. This possibility is denied by a currently fashionable moral relativism. Moral relativism is the idea that what is right or wrong is relative to the individual, or another variant is that moral truths are relative to the values of a given culture. I don't think I even need to go into why moral relativism is logically incoherent. The fact is that the idea that morality is only true relative to your cultural norms is simply false. Slavery, for example, is still an evil even in those cultures which condone it, even if this is most cultures, even our own until not so long ago. Regardless of what your culture thinks, murder is really wrong, rape is really wrong, torture is really wrong, abusing children is really wrong. And if something is really wrong, this fact is not dependent on opinion. Indeed, that's what it means to say that morality is objective. If you don't think that these things really are wrong, then you're deficient in your concept of right and wrong. But only someone evil, sociopathic, or overwhelmed by anti-morality dogma could seriously not feel that our sense of right or wrong is sometimes a sense of something true. Ah, rebuts the skeptic, you yourself have exposed the flaw in your argument. You, like everyone else, base your view of right and wrong on what you feel to be morally right or wrong. But what if you had been brought up in a different culture with different moral sensibilities? There is, it's true, much space for variation in the details of the applications of morality. Nevertheless, there seem to be shared moral fundamentals. The general moral principle across cultures is that causing unnecessary suffering and destruction is wrong. The disagreement then is in what needless suffering and destruction consists. It was perhaps Dostoevsky who first wrote that without God everything is permitted. But not everything is morally permissible. Therefore, there is a God. Thank you.